Let's continue on with our discussion of top-down design in SolidWorks compared to Creo Parametric. In the previous video, we covered the methods in the first two bullets here, where you create part features in the context of an assembly, or you can create complete parts and subassemblies in the context of an assembly. In this video, we will take a look at the methods for the third bullet, where we are going to use something called layout sketches. And for this one, I'm going to jump into Creo Parametric first. So here I am in Creo. Let's start off by creating a brand new assembly. I'm going to make this for a transmission. And let's choose a model template to use. That one is good. And now that I have my assembly started, I will create a special kind of part model called a skeleton. And the skeleton will be the framework for my assembly. So I will go to the create command, and then we have skeleton model selected. We can change the name if we want. I will click the OK button. I will use my standard default template and then click OK. And so here I have the skeleton model. In order to create geometry in there, I will activate it. Of course, I could open it up in its own separate window. Let me turn on the display of my planes, and I'm going to use my layers to turn off my default datums. Oops, let's change to the top level model. Let me use my layers to turn off the default datums at the assembly level. So that's good. Now I'm just seeing my part level datums. So for this transmission, I'm just going to put a few features in here. I'm going to put the basic outline of the case for the transmission, and then the axes for the main shaft and input shaft, and then another axis for the counter shaft, and then a little geometry for the shaft themselves. So for the case, let me select a plane, and I'm going to click on the sketch button. And the point of this video is not sketching, so I'm just going to go through this real quick and then come back when I make some other stuff. Okay, so I have created a couple of axes and a couple of sketches. Now that I have my sketches, I can select them and then do things to them. So for example, I can extrude this one, and let's extrude this one a distance of 250. Actually had the right number in there. And I'm going to generate this as a surface. And let's go to the options, and I will cap the ends. Now let's hit the check mark. I'm going to select the transmission and go to the view drop-down menu. Let's display this in a transparent mode just so I can see the stuff on the inside of it. Also, for creating my next geometry, I will use the sketch region functionality, so I can select a region and then revolve and then pick the axis of revolution. Let me make sure I'm getting the main axis. Hit the check mark. So there I have one of my shafts. Let's repeat that. Let's select and then revolve. Pick the axis. There we have some more geometry. And then let's do that one last time. Revolve. Pick our axis. And then we have our geometry. Oh wait, by the way, I was generating those as solids. I actually want to create them as surfaces. No problem. I can just edit the definition and go back and say, hey, wait, I like my models to be all surfaces for my skeletons, but you can create solid geometry if you want. And so make those quick changes. And now I've got the necessary geometry that starts laying out the structure or the geometry and the shape that I want to use for my various components. Now at this point, if I want to use this in other different parts, one method I could use is by creating what's called a publish geometry feature. So let me go back to my component. Let's go to model intent and then publish geometry. And then I could select the quilts. Let me tap till I get the quilt selected for this particular feature, and I could go to properties and rename this one, and I could call this my published geometry, and this is going to be for my input shaft. but you don't have to create published geometry features. I just want to show you that you can do it. So now that I have what I need in my skeleton, hey, let's activate the top level assembly, and then I can create my other additional components. And I'm just going to create 2 components in here. Let's create a component for the transmission case. Let me just call it, I can't spell today, trans case, and click the OK button. Use my standard default template. Let's locate it using the default constraint. And then I can activate this part. And inside of the part, I can create a copy geometry feature. And for the copy geometry feature, I can grab whatever references that I want to use. So in this particular situation, I will grab that set of surfaces, but I can also grab bodies, chains of edges, and other datum features like planes and axes and so forth. But this is all the geometry that I need for the case. Let's hit the check mark. Let me create another component. Let's activate the top level assembly. Let's click on the create button, and then let's create a component for the input shaft and use our standard template. Let's locate it using the default constraint. Then I'll just activate this component and I will create a copy geometry feature once more. This time I will use a published geometry feature and grab that one that I created, and then let's hit the check mark. And so now if I open up these individual parts, I have the necessary reference geometry in here. So for example, I could choose the quilt. I'm going to tap to get the entire quilt selected, and then choose the thicken command. And maybe I'll thicken this to the inside, and let's give a thickness of 5. And that way I'm just creating some solid geometry based on the assembly references. You can hide that. And so that way we're using the skeleton in order to drive our individual geometry. Let's go back to the assembly. Similarly, if I go to the input shaft over here, I could open it up. And we've got the copy geometry feature that grabs a published geometry, and I could use this as the basis for creating the geometry for this shaft. And this might be the actual surfaces that I want to use, or it could be a space claim, but that's the general idea behind using skeletons. What you're going to do is create that special kind of part model that you can filter out automatically from your bills of material. Also, if you have any solid geometry in here, it won't contribute to your mass properties, but you have this 3D geometry as a reference for making your additional components. And because we use those data sharing features, we can control the dependence between the skeleton and the target parts. And also, if we make changes to the skeletons, we can have them control the geometry in the individual parts as well. So this is how you do it on the Creo Parametric side. Let's take a look at how you do it in SolidWorks. All right, here we are in SolidWorks. Let's click on the new button. I'm going to create a brand new assembly. And when we go to create an assembly, it automatically prompts us to select the first component that we want in here. I'm going to cancel out, and instead we have a button here to create a layout. And in the message, it tells us that we could design top down using a layout with blocks. Parts may then be created from the blocks. So let's choose create layout. And by clicking on that, it automatically puts me into creating a 3D sketch, and the 3D sketch is initially with a 2D sketch located on the XY plane. So let's do that. And for the first entity, well, let me put in a vertical center line. This will help me with some stuff later on, and let it inference into that location and drag it down about so much. Let's hit the escape key. Now for the next entity, let's make a center rectangle that will represent the size of the case, and let's drag it out about so big. Let's put in our dimensions, and so this, let me hit the escape key. Let me go into smart dimension, and we'll dimension this, and it'll have a value of 200, and it accidentally shifted it off. Let's add in a relation to make sure that this and this are coincident. Now let's put in our smart dimension for the length of this line, which will be a value of 300. And the next dimension I want is going to be the distance from here to there. And I want this to be a value of 100. Okay, so that is good for the sketch that I want on this particular plane. And again, this is a 3D sketch. All that we're going to have in here are different sketch entities. So let me hit the check mark to get out of here. I can't actually create and extrude like I could in the skeleton in Creo Parametric. Alternatively, I can create a new plane for the next entities. So let's click on the plane command. And for the first reference, well, let me try grabbing one of the planes out of the tree over here. I think it's the plane front that I want to use. And this is going to be offset a distance of 250. So let's hit the enter key and then the check mark. And you'll notice that the display of the grid moves to the new plane that we created. So now when I'm creating a sketch, it would be a sketch that would be located on here. Let me go to my view orientation and just make sure I'm looking right on there. Now I can create, let's grab a corner rectangle and I'll let it snap to there and to there. And that's good for the rectangle. And now for the next entities that I want to create, let's make some lines and I can have the lines go. Oops, right now I'm still creating a 2D sketch. Let's cancel out of there. To deactivate the plane that you're sketching on, you can double click on the background. And now when I go to sketch different lines, I can click on here and you can then snap it into other different entities. And so that way we're creating, again, our sketch in 3D. That's good for that line. Let's create one for the other different corners in here. And I'm using these in order to represent the box for the case. And let's grab it over there and one other line over here. And if you're familiar with 3D sketches in SolidWorks, use the same technique. So for example, right now it would be creating a sketch on the XY plane. If I hit the tab key, it goes to YZ. If I hit tab once more, it goes to XZ. So you're able to change what plane that you are sketching parallel to. But let's hit the cancel to get out of there. One very important thing about doing a layout versus a regular 3D sketch is you want to make sure that you are activating planes in order to create a 2D sketch in the layout. Because if you don't do that, you won't be able to make blocks later on. And so, for example, let me double click on the plane called right, and you'll notice how it highlights that one now. And now I can create a center line in order to represent my main axis. And let's go there. That's good for that one. And let's create another one. And I'm going to make it so that it's here. And then it's snapping in there, but I really just want it to be parallel. Let's hit the escape key. And now I can dimension from here to there. And I want these to be a distance of 100. And I didn't get the relation that I want. Let's add a relation because I want this to be in line with. Let's grab this and make them coincident. And so there we have the two different center lines. Let's hit the check mark for there. And then for the other stuff I'm going to show, I'm not going to bother creating all the different entities that I created in Creo Parametric version, just because there's really not that much point to showing that. But I'm just going to create one other different rectangle over here. And then let's go to Smart Dimension and put in some of the dimensions. And so let's make that a value of 40. And then let's make the length of this one. And this is going to be a value of 250. And that's all I'm going to dimension in here for now. let's hit the check mark. And let's say I'm done with the layout. Let me double click on the background to deactivate the plane that I was sketching on. Here I can hit the check mark to complete working on the layout. But if you take a look in the design tree, you don't see the layout over here. If you take a look at the symbol for the assembly, it indicates that it does have a layout with it. If you want to get to the layout, you can right click on the top node in the design tree. Here's the layout command, and we're back into the layout. And here it's got our active plane, which is that XY plane. Now I can start creating blocks in order to say which different entities belong to different parts I'm going to make later on. And so when I go to make a block, I can select this line and then this line and then this line and this line. But let's say I want to grab some of the other different entities. If I try to grab this line, it tells me that this geometry is not wholly on the plane, or geometry that is not wholly on the plane cannot be added to the plane or sketch block. So it's only the stuff that's on the current activated plane can be put into a block. So let's hit the check mark for that one. And now let's say I want to grab these 4 entities that are in the counter shaft and I want to use those as a block. If I go to make block and try to pick this, well, it's not going to allow me to do it because it is not in the right activated plane. So let me go to the plane called right, double click on it. Now I can go to make block and I can pick these different entities to compose another block, which is, I guess, sort of like a copy geometry feature, but it's also different entities that allow you to create a new part. And you can see in the tree that we have block 1-1 and block 2-1. Let's hit the check mark to complete out. It's giving me some different warnings about being overdefined. I'm just going to close that for a moment. But here we have the block. Now I can right click on the block, and here we have the option to make a part from the block. And so you can either create the block to part constraint as either being on block or project. I'm going to leave it set to on block and then hit the check mark. And so now we have an actual part here in the tree. I can select the part and use the open button. And in this particular situation, all I have is the sketch, but I can select the sketch and then use the extrude tool and then grab this and drag it out. And then we can change the value to what we want to use and hit the check mark in order to create the boss extrude in that feature. Let's go back to the assembly window and yes, let's rebuild. Yes, I'm getting my error about being overdefined. I don't really know why I'm overdefined in this particular situation, but I can continue on with the process. Okay, in this particular situation now it's insisting that I actually take care of what's overdefined. Let me go into the layout once more. Right click and then go to layout. Let's hit diagnose. Okay. And I'm just going to hit the accept button because that took a long time in order to generate. And so now I think I resolved the necessary issues that will allow me to now right click on the block, and similarly I can make a part from this block. Let's do it on the block itself. So now I have a second part in here. And so that is sort of like the kind of equivalent of the skeleton in Creo Parametric. Now, honestly, from what I hear, a lot of people don't really use this because it is kind of messy, and you can see how all of a sudden I got over constrained with just a very simple kind of sketch of essentially a few different rectangles on different planes. But anyhow, that is how you can use layouts in SolidWorks as part of the top-down design process. I hope you enjoyed this video. For more information, please visit www.creowindchill.com. If you learned something from this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like this video, please click the subscribe button and ring the bell to be informed when new videos are uploaded. Thank you very much.